Welcome back again. This is our recording dealing with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Report, Fishes of the Rio Yaqui Recovery Plan, published in 1995, although I note that it is cited by them as being 1994. However, if you turn into the document, you'll notice that it was signed off on officially by the regional director on the 29th of March 1995, so that's probably a typo. The recovery plan is important for two reasons. First, it establishes the legal terms of reference for the obligations and responsibilities of U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in relation to the listed species and their designated habitat area. Second, the document is important because it contains important historical research that you will otherwise not find anywhere else. And that is to say, for these reports, they often have to commission original research. So I want to take a brief moment to highlight something that is very easy to overlook in this story. And that is the role of the federal government over the administration and management of public lands. And as we will see, it is a role that reflects the changing laws and policies that dictate how we interface and engage and use these public lands. This next short clip will show a 1935 production by the now defunct Major Pictures that reflects a particular view about the federal public domain within Yellowstone National Park.
Ever hear of William F. Cody? Maybe not, but you've heard of Buffalo Bill. They're the same feller, and as the boys say, this is him. Wyoming is mighty proud of Buffalo Bill, and prouder of its wonderful Yellowstone Park, dedicated to the people in 1872. Lying mostly in northwest Wyoming, it is 62 miles long, 54 miles wide, 9/10 under forest. 100 feet from the highway, it is all virgin country, and the largest wild game preserve in America. Shoshone Dam impounds a mighty lake. The dam walls 108 feet in thickness and only 80 feet across. Its waters benefit a vast farm area. Here at Sylvan Pass, 8,599 feet elevation, the air is heady as wine. Across the hazy valley are the peaks of the Tetons. And boys, there's bars in them nar hills. And here's one of them. His name is Romeo, trying to get some of what Juliet. He says, bear with me a moment, my friend. Sylvan Lake, trout fisher's paradise. We bought this country unsight unseen in the Louisiana Purchase of 1803. Just a lot of rocks. People laughed at Trapper Coulter and his tales in 1807 of boiling springs and fountains. They called it Coulter's Hell. They pooh-poohed Jim Bridger's story in 1830, but the geysers were there all right. In 1870, the Washburn Party officially surveyed the strange terrain. The government set it aside for a national park, our first and biggest. This is called the Dragon's Mouth. Elk Meadows. Here and at Jackson Hole are 30,000 head of elk. But we forgot our cards, so we couldn't work our way into the elk convention. We didn't get to see one of them. The average snowfall up here is 110 inches, so there are plenty of waterfalls in summer. My, what a place to camp. But we hate to leave any one place to go to any other. An obliging Ben gets off the highway. Most of them don't. But we must get down to the Spouters. The geyser country lies mostly along the course of the Firehole River. That's a hot name. Yellowstone seems to be the world's halfway vent or spout hole of our internally boiling planet. Far north Iceland is one extreme, far south New Zealand is the other. Yellowstone has more geysers than all the rest of the world put together. These mud volcanoes are called paint pots. Looks like boiling porridge on the stove. The early Indians had a merry way of pushing their enemies into these thermal baths and holding them under. It cured rheumatism, ended the gout, and even took away life itself. Yes, this is a great place to live up here. If you have some ham, you can have some boiled ham and eggs if you have the eggs. And this water's hot, and I mean hot. Step in and try it. All you have to do is hold the egg in there for less than 3 minutes, and out she comes as hard-boiled as a Marine sergeant. Now, what are geysers? How come? Listen, my children, and you shall hear. A geyser isn't a volcano erupting water. It is a periodically erupting spring. The water runs in from melting snow or rain, and when it gets down the vent hole and meets the terrific heat of the molten lava down below, gradually, what with the pressure from below forcing the water rapidly back up through the narrow passage, she gets all het up and bursts into steam, which carries the water on top up with it. Spoof, spoof, see, simple, simple. Then, according to the size of the opening in the earth, it takes so many minutes or hours to get up steam again. This is called Emerald Pool. Beautiful, eh? And now we approach the real spouter. No politician can compare with the big fellow. Over yonder is Old Faithful Lodge, the most extensive log building in the world. Nearest point to the Old Faithful Geyser, the world's greatest. There's another big one called the Giantess, and there used to be a still bigger geyser, the Excelsior, but she quit cold in 1890 and never gave a gasp since. Old Pluto, the janitor down below, must have forgotten to turn on the steam. Old Faithful heaves his column of boiling water 150 feet high once every hour for 4 minutes, and has been doing so since the memory of man runs not to the contrary. The Washburn-Langford party watched it, fascinated, in 1870, checked its recurrent spasms, and gave it the name it still bears. Good Old Faithful. It's rather staggering to think that in all probability, this old blowhard has been carrying on like this since the human race was in its infancy. No wonder people wouldn't believe the story. Too fantastic. And Terrace's trip in 1834, as printed in the Mormon paper The Wasp, was not accepted either. We named this chap the Candy Kid. He sure loves his cough drops. But here we're down to Yellowstone Lake. You simply can't avoid this lake. It has 100 miles of shoreline all inside the park. The largest high-level lake in America, 7,730 feet elevation. Home of the famous cutthroat trout.
Now, before we shift to the current state of affairs, I want to note that Yellowstone was created in 1872, and yet the American Civil War had literally just ended in 1865. Furthermore, the Transcontinental Railway had not been established until 1868. And so this is a time of enormous change in the United States. Not only change in terms of its population and its demographics, but also in terms of its size and landmass. And so it's quite exceptional and quite remarkable when you think about it, that in 1872, things appeared to be on balance, relatively stable. And so this new emergent era of federal set-aside began. And so what we're going to see by the time we arrive at 1973 is a dramatic change in perception with regard to the public domain and federal lands. No longer will it be viewed simply as an area that can be freely engaged and utilized, but rather it's something that can be at risk to loss, and that loss can be permanent. And so it reminds me of the image, as we move forward, of those two ladies in the early 1900s looking out over the Grand Canyon and thinking about what their exact station would look like today. So it is sufficient to say at this point that the place where the two women were standing in 1900 overlooking the Grand Canyon with that nostalgic, classic black and white photo of the beautiful vista, it is safe to say that that spot has changed. And before we dive in headlong into the 1973 Endangered Species Act, I want to highlight that the old tensions that begin back in 1872, they still remain. And in fact, those tensions can be summarized as follows. On the one hand, you have a public policy and legal choice as to whether or not you conserve the federal public domain to the exclusion of others. That's on the one hand. Or, on the other, do you preserve the federal public domain for the enjoyment of everyone? Now that's stark and an oversimplification, but that tension is readily apparent even today. And in fact, it does not dissipate, but rather it is heightened for two very simple reasons. First, our perspective and our method of engaging with the environment has changed dramatically. Look, for example, at the growth of the industry that is the outdoor industry. Now, if I sound hesitant to label it as a coherent, singular industry, that's because I am. It's an industry that actually reflects the multiplicity of recreational actors who each claim a specific usufructuary right. And with it, they claim an economic justification. For example, in Arizona, quiet recreation, which would be thought of as camping without RVs, canoeing, hiking without mechanized vehicles. So these are trails that you could have, for example, dune buggies traversing at one point or hikers the next. They claim that $162 million is the 2015 market value of their contribution to the Arizona economy. That's huge. Then likewise, other groups can point to similarly large numbers. And at the end of the day, we're talking about a multi-billion-dollar industry in the true modern sense of the word. Second, I want to recognize that the population of the United States has changed dramatically from our starting point being the two women overlooking the Grand Canyon in the early 1900s in that tin-shaded black and white photo. Firstly, I cannot underscore enough the significance of the simple fact that the United States is the third most populous country in the world. There are over 310 million people within the United States. And over the course of a year, anywhere between 50 and 75 million visitors will arrive here. Further, if you look at the population disparity between the United States and the countries that fall within 7 ranks below, you'll notice a very, very significant difference in the decline of each nation-state's population. So what I'm saying by this is that it's not simply that the United States is the third most populous country in the world, but rather it really doesn't have a close contender, and it won't have one anywhere in the near future. The second and final point that I'd like to make is the change that has been brought about through technology and choices people make within the United States with respect to their career. You don't have to necessarily be in your office 5 days a week. You can find an occupation that gives you something called a lifestyle, and that can include a regular engagement with the outdoors and the national park system. And so, before we embark upon the Endangered Species Act and a discussion of the recovery plan, I want to give you this one example of the skywalk, because it actually is very near to where that photo was taken. And what I want to highlight in the skywalk case is that it does represent a different way of engaging with what would otherwise be a beautiful pastoral view. And you can think about some of the policy tensions it creates, but also how it increases access. And so what I'm going to show you here is a quick promotional video of the Skywalk Bridge, which is a tribally owned enterprise here in the state of Arizona.